The mysterious signal. The silence of space was broken only by the low hum of the engines aboard the stellar Voyager. It was a routine mission. Captain Ilara and her crew were traveling through the uncharted region of the galaxy, exploring new planets and gathering data. They had been in deep space for weeks, and though the crew was experienced, the silence of space was always unsettling. They had seen strange things in their travels, but nothing like this. It started with a faint signal. At first, it was just static, barely detectable. The crew almost ignored it. It could have been space debris or some natural phenomenon. But then it repeated. The same strange pattern. It was coming from a location that was deep within a nebula, a place few ships dared to enter. The signal was unlike anything Captain Ilara had encountered before. It wasn't just random noise. It had a rhythm to it, a clear structure. It was an encoded message, but from who? The decision was made quickly. They would investigate the source of the signal. The stellar Voyager adjusted course, heading toward the nebula. The crew watched as the swirling clouds of gas and dust grew larger on the view screen. The nebula was thick, its colors beautiful yet terrifying. No one knew what dangers it held, but the signal called to them. There was something there, something important. As they entered the nebula, the signal grew stronger, but it also became more distorted. The crew's instruments flickered and sputtered. The communication systems struggled to maintain a connection. Still, they pushed forward. Whatever the signal was, it was too important to ignore. For hours, the crew navigated through the dense clouds, their instruments barely functioning. The stars outside the ship were blotted out by the thick mist of the nebula. The air in the control room felt heavier, almost suffocating. Tension mounted. Everyone knew this was no ordinary mission. There was something strange, something unsettling, about the way the signal seemed to pull them deeper into the nebula. Captain Ilara could feel it in her bones. It was as if they were being drawn into something. Waiting. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they arrived at the source. There, in the middle of the swirling mass of gas and dust, was an old, derelict ship. It appeared out of nowhere, as if it had materialized out of the very nebula itself. The ship was massive, far larger than any vessel the crew had seen before. Its hull was dark, covered in strange markings, some of which glowed faintly in the dark. It was as if the ship had been abandoned for centuries. But the signal was coming from it, pulsing in the vast emptiness of space. Captain Ilara ordered the ship to approach cautiously. The stellar Voyager inched closer to the ancient vessel. As they drew nearer, the crew noticed something even more strange. The ship was human-made, or at least it appeared to be. Its design was similar to Earth's older ships, but there were modifications, advanced systems, alien-like materials. It was a fusion of human technology and something else, something not of this world. How could this be? This ship had been lost for generations. No one knew of its existence, yet here it was, floating in the dead of space. As the stellar Voyager docked with the mysterious vessel, the crew couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The air was still, thick with the unknown. The doors of the derelict ship were sealed, but the crew managed to access the entry hatch. Inside, the ship was dark and silent. There were no signs of life, no signs of struggle, just the faint hum of systems still running. It was like stepping into a ghost ship. Empty. Abandoned. The corridors were narrow and long, covered in dust. The crew moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing off the metal walls. The ship's interior was unlike anything they had ever seen. The walls were lined with strange symbols, some of which seemed to shimmer when the crew passed them. The crew couldn't make sense of them, but the symbols felt familiar, almost like something they had seen before in old Earth archives. But that wasn't possible. No ship, no human fleet, had ever ventured this far into space before. In the heart of the ship, they found a large control room. It was filled with old computers, some of which were still functional. The signal had led them here. The terminal was active, and Captain Ilara approached it with caution. She tapped a few buttons, and the screen flickered to life. What appeared on the screen was a language no one recognized. It was a complex series of symbols and markings that made no sense at first. Yet, as Ilara watched, something strange happened. The symbols began to change, rearranging themselves into words that seemed to be in an ancient dialect of human speech. The message began to form, but it was incomplete. The crew couldn't decipher all of it, but the words that they could understand sent a chill down their spines. Humanity lost, but not forgotten. We are waiting. The meaning was clear. This was no ordinary lost ship. This was a message from humanity, but not from any humanity the crew knew. They had found something far more ancient, far more powerful than they could have ever imagined. The truth was beginning to unfold, but it raised more questions than answers. Captain Ilara turned to her crew. Her heart raced. This isn't a simple mission anymore. We've stumbled upon something much bigger than ourselves. The crew was on edge. Whatever had happened to this ship, whatever it had been through, it wasn't over. The message was clear. There were others out there, humans like them, but different, and they were waiting for something. But what? The sense of foreboding only grew stronger as they tried to decode the rest of the message. Time was running out. Whatever they had discovered in the depths of space was now drawing them in. It wasn't just a mystery, it was a warning. And the real danger was just beginning. As Captain Ilara stared at the screen, the cryptic message kept flashing before her eyes. Humanity lost, but not forgotten. We are waiting. The words haunted her, each syllable heavier than the last. The silence in the control room was suffocating. Her crew, usually a calm and collected group, was visibly shaken. They had found something far bigger than they had ever anticipated. Something ancient, something human, but not human in the way they understood. Captain Ilara clenched her fists and turned to face her crew. We need to know more. Prepare for further investigation. Her voice was steady, though her mind raced with questions. Who were these humans? Where had they been? And most importantly, why were they waiting? The crew dispersed to their stations, readying themselves for what lay ahead. The stellar Voyager was locked into the derelict ship, and the crew prepared to explore deeper into its eerie halls. The message had ignited their curiosity, but also a sense of dread. Something was off about this entire situation. No one had ever spoken of humans existing beyond the known colonies, let alone in this distant part of the galaxy. The ship they were aboard was much older than anything in their archives, and now they were on the edge of discovering something that would change everything they knew about their history. Captain Ilara moved through the ship's narrow corridors, leading her team deeper into the bowels of the ancient vessel. The interior was strange. The walls seemed to pulse with a faint green glow, casting an unsettling light on the crew. The air was stale, thick with the smell of dust and metal. Every door they passed was sealed tight, and none of the lights worked. It was as if the ship had been abandoned in a hurry, left to decay in the void of space. As they moved forward, they encountered another strange thing. It wasn't just the eerie quiet that unsettled them. It was the sense that they were being watched. The walls seemed to echo with every step they took, but there were no sounds of life. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing. Only the distant hum of the ship's systems, which had somehow remained online after all these years. The crew eventually reached a large chamber at the heart of the ship. It was unlike anything they had seen before. The chamber was vast, its walls covered in intricate designs and strange symbols. It was as though this was the core of the ship, where the answers to their questions lay. But the most chilling discovery was the massive central console in the center of the room. The console was made of an unfamiliar material, sleek and dark, unlike anything the crew had encountered in their studies of human tech. As Ilara approached it, her mind raced. This wasn't just any ship. It was something much older, something far beyond the technology humanity had developed. She was standing in a room that had been abandoned long ago, yet it felt as though it had been waiting for them. "Let's see what we can find," Ilara said, her voice low as she moved to inspect the console. Her hands hovered over the controls, unsure of where to start. The crew watched closely, knowing this could be the moment that revealed everything. She pressed a few buttons, and the console flickered to life. A strange language filled the screen, just like before. It wasn't any dialect they recognized, but something in Ilara's gut told her that this wasn't just an alien language. This was human, or at least it had once been. The symbols began to shift, rearranging into something familiar, but it was incomplete. Suddenly, the words changed, clearer this time, but still fragmented. "The others, they will return. Be ready, they know." The room fell into an eerie silence. The words seemed to linger in the air, heavy with meaning. The crew exchanged glances, but no one spoke. Who were these others? And what did it mean by "they will return"? Was this some kind of warning? Or were they being led into something much more dangerous? Ilara's heart pounded in her chest as she looked over the data. The fragmented message offered more questions than answers. She turned to her second-in-command, Lieutenant Cade, who had been closely examining the symbols. "Any idea what this means?" Cade shook his head. "Not yet, but we're dealing with something far beyond anything we've seen before. This technology, it doesn't match anything from Earth's history. This ship, it's older, and its design is unlike any other human vessel we've ever encountered." The crew was uneasy. It was as if they were standing on the edge of something profound, yet terrifying. The feeling of being watched persisted, gnawing at the edges of their minds. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the ship and the soft clicking of Ilara's console as she tried to decode more of the message. But it was clear, whatever this ship was, whatever had happened here, it was no ordinary piece of lost history. Then, without warning, the console powered down. The lights in the chamber flickered and dimmed. The crew exchanged nervous glances. Something had changed. It was as if the ship had sensed their intrusion, responding to their presence. Ilara immediately ordered the crew to return to the stellar Voyager. "We've seen enough for now. We need to analyze this data in safety," she said, her voice firm but filled with uncertainty. Her instincts were telling her that they had just scratched the surface. The answers were out there, somewhere on this ancient ship, but the deeper they went, the more the feeling of danger pressed in around them. As they made their way back to the airlock, a strange thought kept lingering in Ilara's mind. This wasn't just a ship. It was a message from humanity, but from a humanity they didn't recognize. The ship wasn't just abandoned. It had been waiting for them. And the rest of the message, the one that remained hidden, felt like a warning. The real question was, what was waiting for them beyond this ship? The crew of the stellar Voyager returned to their ship. The weight of what they had uncovered began to settle heavily on them. The message, the strange technology, and the eerie feeling of being watched all seemed to point to something far larger than they had anticipated. Captain Ilara's mind raced with possibilities, but one thought kept pushing through. What had they discovered, and who were these other humans? Back aboard the stellar Voyager, the crew quickly retreated to their command center. Ilara sat at her station, scanning through the data they had recovered. Lieutenant Cade stood beside her, still trying to decipher the cryptic language from the alien console. The rest of the crew worked silently, reviewing the data and trying to piece together the fragments of information that they had gathered. "This doesn't make any sense," Cade muttered, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The technology we've encountered so far doesn't match any of the known records. It's too advanced, but it's human." His voice trailed off as he ran his fingers through his hair. "And the language, it's almost familiar, but not quite." Ilara nodded. She had the same unsettling feeling. It was as though they were on the verge of uncovering something monumental, but every time they thought they were getting closer, the answers slipped further away. The crew needed to know what was really going on, but they couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were being led into something dangerous. Her thoughts were interrupted by a flashing warning light on her console. She quickly turned her attention to it, her heart rate accelerating. "What is it, Lieutenant?" Cade's fingers danced across his console, and a string of numbers appeared on the screen. His eyes widened as he read them. "Captain, these readings are coming from the derelict ship. The power levels are increasing. It's coming online again." Ilara's pulse quickened. "How is that possible? We checked the ship's systems before we left. There was no sign of any active power." She leaned forward, trying to make sense of the data. "What do you mean, it's coming online?" Cade's voice grew tense. "I don't know, but it looks like the ship is reacting to something. The energy levels are spiking, and there are strange signals coming from the central chamber. It's almost like the ship is alive." The crew exchanged nervous glances. This was a twist they hadn't expected. They had assumed the ship was abandoned, but now it seemed to be responding to their presence. They had disturbed something far more powerful than they could have imagined. "We need to go back," Ilara said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We can't wait for it to fully power up. Whatever's happening, we need to get to the heart of it before it's too late." The crew quickly prepared to return to the derelict ship. As they made their way to the airlock, Ilara's mind raced with possibilities. What if the ship was some kind of beacon, waiting for humanity to find it? What if the message wasn't a warning, but a call for help? She couldn't ignore the feeling that they were being watched, and now it seemed like the ship itself was beginning to respond to their every move. The stellar Voyager reattached to the derelict ship, and the crew made their way back inside, their footsteps echoing in the now more ominous halls. As they walked, the sense of being watched grew stronger. The faint hum of the ship's systems was no longer comforting. It felt like something was stirring, something ancient and powerful. When they reached the central chamber, they found the console flickering, its once dormant lights now flashing erratically. Ilara approached it cautiously, but there was no turning back now. They had already crossed the threshold. The ship was awakening, and they needed to know why. She placed her hand on the console, and the moment she did, the ship seemed to come alive around her. The walls pulsed with light, and the symbols on the walls shifted, rearranging into new patterns. The ship was communicating with them, but in a language they couldn't fully comprehend. The atmosphere in the room grew tense, and the crew held their breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Then, as if responding to their presence, a new message flashed on the screen. It was clear this time, but it made no sense. "They know. They are coming. Be ready." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. The words were chilling, and the urgency in the message was undeniable. They know. They are coming. Who was coming? And why was the ship so certain? Before she could say anything, the lights in the room flickered one last time, and the screen went dark. A low rumble echoed through the walls, as if the ship was groaning, waking from a long slumber. The crew exchanged looks of confusion and fear. They had come here looking for answers, but all they had found was more mystery, more questions than they had ever expected. Cade's voice broke the silence. "Captain, we need to leave. Whatever this is, it's not safe. The ship is reacting to us in ways I can't explain." Ilara hesitated, but only for a moment. The ship was warning them, but what were they being warned about? And who were the message referred to? "We're not leaving yet," Ilara said, her voice firm. "We need to find out who or what is coming. We can't leave without answers." The crew braced themselves for whatever was next. The ship was clearly alive, and it was clear that they weren't the only ones who had been waiting for its awakening. Something, or someone, was coming, and the stellar Voyager had just stumbled into a situation far beyond their understanding. The tension in the air was thick, like the calm before a storm. As the crew of the stellar Voyager stood in the eerie silence of the derelict ship's central chamber, Ilara could feel the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. The walls of the ship seemed to breathe, and the unsettling hum from the ship's systems echoed through the narrow corridors like a distant warning. The mysterious message had left them with more questions than answers, but there was one thing Ilara knew for certain. They weren't alone. The crew gathered around the flickering console, their eyes wide with fear and curiosity. Cade, the ship's lead technician, was still trying to make sense of the data on his screen, but the symbols kept shifting, defying all known patterns. It's like the ship itself is trying to communicate, but we just can't decipher it, he muttered, frustration clear in his voice. Nothing we've ever encountered behaves like this. Ilara glanced at him, her mind racing. The message had been clear enough. They know. They are coming. Be ready. But what did it mean? Who were they, and why was the ship warning them? The whole situation felt like a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit, and the longer they stayed, the more they felt like they were walking straight into a trap. We need to move, Ilara said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. We've overstayed our welcome here. The longer we stay, the more we risk whatever they are getting closer. The crew quickly prepared to leave the central chamber, but as they turned to exit, the ship seemed to respond once again. The walls trembled lightly, and the lights flickered once more. Ilara paused, her heart pounding in her chest. There was something happening, something they couldn't yet understand, but they were running out of time. We're not leaving yet, Ilara said, turning back to the console. There's something we're missing here. This ship is trying to tell us something. I need answers. Her determination was clear, but even as she spoke, the rest of the crew felt an uneasy shiver run through them. Something about the ship's reaction felt like an ominous warning, as if they were getting too close to something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. We should go back to the ship, Cade suggested, his voice low. Whatever this is, we don't have enough information. It's too dangerous. But Ilara wasn't ready to give up just yet. There was a strange compulsion pulling her to the console, urging her to dig deeper. She placed her hand on the controls once again. And this time, the ship responded immediately. The screen flashed violently, and a new set of symbols appeared. But they weren't just shifting this time. They were rearranging themselves, forming a coherent message, though it was still in a language they didn't fully understand. As Ilara stared at the symbols, her thoughts raced. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she knew they had no choice but to keep pushing forward. This could be the key to unlocking the mystery of the derelict ship and the message they had received. She motioned to Cade, who quickly began translating the symbols, his fingers flying over the console. After what felt like an eternity, Cade's voice broke the silence. Captain, it's a warning, a distress signal, but not for us. The ship, it's telling us that the others are coming. They're not human. Ilara's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Who are they? Cade swallowed hard, clearly disturbed by what he had just uncovered. The message, it's not just a warning. It's a description of the ones who are coming. They're a species we've never encountered before. And they're not friendly. The ship has been hiding from them for centuries, trying to protect humanity's last remnants. The others are an alien race, merciless, brutal. They've wiped out entire civilizations, and now they're coming for us. A cold chill ran down Ilara's spine as she processed Cade's words. The ship they had thought abandoned was actually hiding from an unimaginable threat, one that could destroy humanity if they weren't careful. The realization hit hard, and Ilara understood just how close they were to danger. The message is clear, she said, her voice hard. The others know we're here. We need to get out of this ship now. We're not prepared for this. But just as she turned to order the crew to leave, the ship seemed to react violently. The lights flickered one last time, and a loud mechanical groan echoed through the halls. The ship trembled as if it was alive, as if it was trying to shake them off. The walls shook harder now, and the sound of metal creaking under pressure filled the air. Cade's voice was full of panic. Captain, something's wrong. The ship, It's locking us in. We can't get out." The doors to the chamber slammed shut with a deafening sound, trapping the crew inside. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, and the faint hum of the ship's systems grew louder, almost deafening. Ilara's pulse quickened as the crew's fear grew palpable. They had triggered something that had awoken with the ship. And now they were stuck in the middle of it. "We need to get back to the stellar Voyager," Ilara commanded, her voice steadied despite the rising panic around her. "Cade, can you find a way to override the door controls?" Cade rushed to his console, but his face was pale as he worked. "I'm trying, but the ship's systems are completely locked down. I can't break through. Whatever is happening, the ship's not letting us leave." Ilara clenched her fists, her mind racing. Time was running out. They had no way to know when the others would arrive or how long the ship could hold them captive. She didn't know how, but she had to find a way to escape, to get them back to the stellar Voyager before it was too late. As the ship continued to pulse with strange energy, Ilara knew that the real test was about to begin. The others were coming, and they had to be ready for whatever was waiting for them. But how could they prepare for something they knew nothing about? And how much time did they really have left? The ship's walls vibrated, sending tremors through the crew's bodies as they scrambled in panic. Ilara stood frozen, her mind racing. The doors were locked, and the ship itself seemed to be fighting against them. The cold metallic sound of shifting gears echoed through the narrow hallways, reverberating like a warning. The once silent ship had become a living, breathing nightmare, its every creak and groan reminding them that they were no longer in control. Cade's face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead as he worked furiously at the console. His fingers trembled as he attempted to override the door's security system, but every attempt only led to another failure. The screen flickered violently, flashing warnings in red text. The ship's defensive mechanisms were in full operation. "We're not getting out that way," Cade said, his voice tight with fear. "The ship's locked down completely. I can't break through." Ilara's eyes narrowed, her jaw clenched in frustration. They needed to think fast. They couldn't afford to waste time. The crew was becoming more restless by the second, their fear palpable in the air. They had no idea when the others would arrive, but every passing moment brought them closer to danger. "We have to find another way out," Ilara said, her voice low but filled with resolve. "We can't stay here." As the crew began to move, searching for any possible escape route, a sudden, sharp sound echoed through the ship, a long, drawn-out howl that seemed to come from deep within the vessel itself. The noise was unlike anything they had ever heard. It was a primal, terrifying sound that sent chills down their spines. It was the kind of sound that could only mean one thing. Something alive was aboard. "Did you hear that?" Cade whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief. Ilara didn't answer. She was already moving, her mind focused on one thing, finding a way out. They couldn't afford to let fear control them. But even as she moved down the darkened corridors, she could feel the weight of something terrible pressing down on them. The ship had once been their sanctuary, but now it was a prison, and whatever was inside was hunting them. The crew moved cautiously, every step slow and deliberate. Ilara led them through the ship's maze-like passages, hoping to find a way back to the docking bay. But as they turned another corner, they froze. In front of them stood a figure, cloaked in darkness. It was humanoid in shape, but its form was unnaturally tall and thin, its outline obscured by the shadows. It stood perfectly still, watching them with an unsettling, silent intensity. Ilara's heart raced as she took a step back, instinctively pulling her crew behind her. Her hand reached for her weapon, but the figure made no move to attack. Instead, it simply stood there, its presence as suffocating as the silence around them. "What is that?" one of the crew members whispered, fear rising in their voice. "I don't know," Ilara replied, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "But it's not friendly." The figure didn't speak. It didn't move. It just watched, and the longer they stood there, the more they felt as though they were in the presence of something far beyond their understanding. It was as if the very air had thickened, as if the ship itself was closing in around them. The silence was broken only by the distant hum of the ship's engines, a constant reminder that they were trapped in its dark, oppressive embrace. Then, without warning, the figure stepped forward. Ilara instinctively raised her weapon, but before she could fire, the figure disappeared into the shadows, vanishing without a trace. The crew remained frozen, unsure of what had just happened. "What was that?" Cade asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Ilara admitted, her mind reeling. "But I'm starting to think we're not alone here. And whatever that thing was, it's connected to the others." As the crew continued their search for an escape, Ilara's thoughts raced. The ship was no longer just a place to hide. It had become a death trap. Whatever force controlled this ship was far beyond anything they had ever encountered. It was as if the ship itself was working against them, trying to keep them trapped inside, hiding them from whatever others were coming. But why? What was this ship trying to protect them from? And what kind of force would be powerful enough to lock them in and send such an ominous warning? Every answer seemed to lead to more questions, and every step they took seemed to pull them deeper into the heart of the mystery. But there was one thing Ilara knew for sure. The others were coming, and they were not going to stop until they found the humans hiding in this dark, forgotten corner of the galaxy. The crew had no choice but to keep moving. They had to find a way to escape before it was too late. And as Ilara's gaze flicked to the empty corridors around them, she couldn't shake the feeling that the ship itself was watching them, waiting for them to make their next move. But no matter how much the ship seemed to fight them, Ilara knew one thing for certain. They would not stop. Not now, not until they uncovered the truth about the others, and not until they found a way to survive the horrors lurking in the shadows. The tension aboard the ship grew with each passing minute. Ilara's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one more troubling than the last. The strange, silent figure they had encountered still haunted her. It wasn't just a random anomaly. It felt purposeful, like a warning. She couldn't shake the feeling that the ship itself was hiding something far worse than they had ever imagined. As they continued their search, the crew grew more disoriented. The ship's layout seemed to be shifting, corridors twisting in ways that made no sense. What had once been familiar now felt like a labyrinth, an endless maze with no exit. Ilara's eyes darted over the crew, but she saw the same fear in each of them. They were all in this together, but none of them knew what they were truly up against. "We need to figure out what's going on," Ilara muttered under her breath, her fingers tightening around her weapon as she led the crew down another dark passageway. "If the ship is hiding something, we have to find it." Cade, walking just behind her, nodded grimly. "I'm with you, Ilara, but something doesn't add up. It feels like the ship is alive." Her thoughts mirrored his. It did feel that way. The walls, the air, even the shadows seemed to be pressing in on them. The ship wasn't just a structure, it was a presence. An oppressive, suffocating presence that wanted to keep them in the dark, lost in its endless corridors. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, followed by the sound of scraping metal. The crew froze. Ilara's heart raced, and her hand immediately reached for her weapon, but there was nothing to shoot at, nothing visible. The noise came again, closer this time, echoing off the walls. Something was there, something in the shadows. "Ilara," Cade whispered, his voice tight. "We have to move. Whatever that is, it's getting closer." The crew didn't need any more encouragement. They bolted down the corridor, their footsteps reverberating loudly in the eerie silence of the ship. Ilara could hear the scrape again, like claws dragging against metal, just behind them. Every second felt like an eternity. Her mind raced, her eyes scanning every corner, every possible escape route. But the ship seemed to close in around them. The corridors grew narrower, the shadows deeper. And then they saw it. At the far end of the hall, the lights flickered, and in the dim glow, a shape emerged. It was humanoid but twisted, like something not entirely human. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. Its movements were slow and deliberate, its eyes glowing faintly with an unnatural light. It wasn't like the first figure they had encountered. It was more tangible, more threatening. Without a word, the creature lunged toward them. "Ilara, move!" Cade shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward a side door. The rest of the crew followed suit, scrambling for cover. The door slammed shut behind them, but the sound of scraping claws against metal didn't stop. It was as if the thing was trying to find them, to reach them. Ilara pressed her back against the wall, her breath coming in short, rapid bursts. They were trapped. This was it. Whatever that thing was, it was not alone. It was part of something bigger, something far more dangerous. "We can't stay here," Ilara said, her voice shaking. "If we stay hidden, it will find us. We need to get to the control room. We need answers." "Agreed," Cade said, his voice strained. "But the control room is on the other side of the ship, and we're not the only ones who want to get there." As if on cue, the walls shuddered again, this time accompanied by a low guttural growl. The creature was still hunting them. The crew exchanged anxious glances. Ilara's mind was racing. They had to get to the control room. It was their only chance. But the ship was alive with danger. Every step they took, every turn they made, brought them closer to the truth, whether they were ready for it or not. They didn't have a choice. Ilara motioned for the crew to follow her, and they moved swiftly, carefully, avoiding the dark corners where the creatures lurked. Each moment felt like it could be their last. The weight of what was happening pressed down on them, and the cold air seemed to grow colder the further they went. They finally reached the control room doors. Ilara tried the console, but the panel didn't respond. She cursed under her breath, slamming her fist against it in frustration. "It's locked. We need to get in." "We don't have time," Cade said urgently. "They're coming. We need to find another way." But just as Ilara was about to speak, the doors slid open on their own. The control room was bathed in dim red light. Inside, the hum of the ship's machinery filled the air, but the room was eerily quiet. There was something unsettling about it, something wrong. Ilara stepped inside, her weapon raised, the rest of the crew close behind her. And then she saw it. On the central console was a message, glowing in bright red text. "We know you are here. You will leave." The words chilled Ilara to the core. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. Whatever was behind the events on this ship, whatever was hunting them, it was no accident. And it wasn't just some random entity. It was connected to the ship, to the people who had disappeared, to the other humans who had been lost. And now, they had found them. The air in the control room seemed to thicken with each passing second. The lights above flickered, casting strange, elongated shadows across the walls. Ilara stood frozen, her eyes locked onto the glowing red message on the console. "We know you are here. You will leave." The words seemed to pulse, almost alive, as if the ship itself was breathing. It wasn't just a ship anymore. It was something else. Something dark. Something waiting. "Ilara, we need to leave. Now." Cade's voice broke through the tension in the room, his hands gripping his weapon tightly. The crew was on edge, their eyes darting nervously between the ominous words on the screen and the dark corridors outside. They knew the creatures were out there, but now it seemed they were being hunted by something even worse. But Ilara couldn't move. Something told her that running wasn't the solution. They had to find out what was really happening. They had to face whatever was lurking in the shadows. Only then could they leave this place alive. "We can't run, Cade," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, but the uncertainty in her eyes betrayed her. "There's something else going on here. Something bigger. We have to stop it." Before Cade could protest, the room's lights flickered again. The console beside Ilara hummed to life, and another message flashed across the screen. They nevrleft. You are all party of the hunt now. The words were colder than the air around them. It was clear now. Whatever had caused the disappearance of the previous crew, whatever had sent the original distress signals, it was not just an entity. It was something alive, feeding off fear, and it had been watching them the whole time, waiting for them to come here, waiting for them to find the truth. Suddenly, the ship shook violently. A deep rumbling sound echoed through the walls, and the lights went out completely, leaving the crew in complete darkness. The only sound now was the rhythmic thumping of their own hearts. "Elara," Cade shouted, his voice filled with panic. "Get us out of here." The crew began scrambling for the exit, but Elara held her ground. She wasn't going to run. Not yet. She had to know what was behind this, what was controlling the ship. The others could escape if they wanted to, but she couldn't leave without answers. From the shadows came the sound of scraping metal, followed by the low growl they had heard before. It was closer this time, the creature moving just beyond the threshold of the control room. Then, through the thick darkness, a pair of glowing eyes appeared, staring into hers. There was no mistaking it. This was no random animal. This was the thing that had been hunting them all along. It moved closer, and the crew backed away in fear. Elara stood her ground, her heart racing in her chest. She could feel the creature's presence drawing nearer, feel its eyes on her, but she didn't flinch. "Who are you?" Elara demanded, her voice shaking but defiant. "What do you want from us?" The creature stopped moving, its glowing eyes narrowing, as if it understood her question. Then, without warning, it spoke. Its voice was guttural, distorted, as if it were coming from deep within the ship itself. "We are the lost, the forgotten. You are our new prey. You will never leave, just like the others before you. We were the first, and now you are part of our story." Elara's blood ran cold. The creature was not a single being, but something more. It was part of a collective, a hive that fed on those who dared to enter. The others it spoke of, the ones that had disappeared before them, hadn't just been lost. They had become part of the ship, part of the hunt. The creature lunged, but before it could reach her, Cade fired. The blast rang out, but the creature barely flinched, its skin absorbing the blast as though it were nothing more than a scratch. The crew scattered, but Elara didn't move. She was focused on the console again, her mind racing. There had to be a way to stop it, some weakness. She didn't have time to think, only to act. In a burst of desperation, she slammed her palm onto the console, sending a surge of power through the ship. The entire vessel seemed to shudder as if waking from a long slumber. The lights flickered back on, and the ship groaned, its systems reacting to the sudden influx of energy. Then, as if in response, the creature screeched, its body convulsing. The walls around them trembled. It was as if the ship itself was fighting back against the creature, or perhaps it was trying to regain control. "Get to the escape pods," Elara shouted, finally breaking her focus. She grabbed Cade's arm, pulling him toward the exit. "Now, we need to leave, before this whole place comes down on us." With a final, desperate push, the crew raced down the hall, following the flashing emergency lights leading them to the escape pods. Behind them, the sound of the creature's screech echoed, followed by an explosion of energy. The ship was coming apart, its systems shutting down in a final desperate attempt to survive. Elara didn't look back. She had to trust that they would make it out alive. As the crew boarded the escape pods and the doors sealed shut, the ship began to collapse around them. The last thing Elara saw before the pod ejected was the glowing eyes of the creature, now fading into the darkness of the ship as it crumbled into nothingness. They had survived. But the question remained, what else had they uncovered, and what did the ship's final message mean? There were more answers waiting out there, answers that would change everything.